It turns out my Father's Day present was a Bradley Beal trade, and it was a weird trade. We knew it was going to get weird this weekend, Russillo, because he was like, Miami or Phoenix, those two sound good. And it's like, well, Phoenix doesn't have any first-round picks basically for the rest of the decade. And Miami is too smart to go all in on a Bradley Beal trade. They'll do bargain basement shopping. And Washington ends up just settling for basically Chris Paul, Shamet, and between 3 and 37 second-round picks. Where do you want to start? You take us.
Let's start with this. I think it's stupid for Phoenix. And I think the other part that we have to get into that we can spend some time on is also who Beal is, right? It's like trying to talk through what we all think of Beal in the NBA as he turns 30 later this month. But the first part of this is, I know like the way we've talked about super teams is that I felt like that was the norm. So whoever was building a team had to deal with Miami, right? They had to deal with Golden State. They had to deal with Cleveland. The Lakers, part of their run of winning it with AD and LeBron a few years ago, a big part of that story all season long was when are they getting their third guy? Because we were just conditioned to believe that whoever was the NBA favorite had to be a big three. And what happened is it just kind of stopped. It just stopped, even though other teams were trying to do it. Certainly Brooklyn was trying to do it 2 different times. It felt like Philly was flirting with the idea. But we really didn't have it.
It stopped because the league got too talented.
Yeah,
it's too hard to just have 3 guys and do the 2012 Miami Heat model, basically. You can't do it, I don't think, in this day and age.
Right, and I think like there could be some argument to adding Drew Holiday to Middleton and Giannis, maybe. Chris Paul towards the end when they were in the finals a couple of years ago, losing to Milwaukee with Booker, and then Ayton. I mean, that doesn't seem all that accurate, right? So I felt like we always watched going, well, who's the next team that's going to add that third guy? And what we've seen recently now is that we have these championships because there is no other team. There isn't a team with the established 3 guys that obviously the best versions of it are Miami, Golden State, and then probably that second Cleveland run. So the other part is that like with Jokic having this run, I think a lot of dumb things are being said, being like, that's the way to do it. It's like, yeah, if you have Jokic, it's the way to do it. Like it's so dismissive of who Jokic is. So if we just start from the Phoenix part of this, even though the price is nothing, as you astutely point out, the no trade thing, I don't know if the market was going to be that hot for him without a no trade. This package coming back feels like it's atrocious for Washington. But the Phoenix part of this, to now have these 4 guys, including Ayton, knowing that a Booker extension's coming in another year, the tax apron stuff that we covered where it's almost like the closest we've ever been to a hard cap, Beal's not the guy to lock yourself into this kind of financial commitment.
You and I did not text about this because I figured we'd be somewhat aligned. I just don't like the trade for Phoenix. And I know in a vacuum you can go, well, look what we gave up and look what we got back. Sure. If you look at just like if we're putting together big threes, how the teams put them together since 2008 when the Celtics kind of were the first one to go really on the map with it, with the KG and Paul Pierce and Ray Allen. And they were like, big 3. And the way they built those 3 together, all those 3 guys complemented each other. And then we've had different variations of it over the years. Brooklyn was probably the weirdest, where they put Durant, Harden, and Kyrie together, and they're like, we're just going to outscore everybody. Our offense is going to be unbelievable. And we saw it for about 2 weeks, and then they had injuries, and we never saw it again.
And just to jump in on the Nets, like, would you agree that had they all been healthy, I still think that team would have been in contender, despite what I think of some of the dudes?
Yeah, which will be the case with Phoenix. I just don't love how the 3 guys complement each other, and I think you and I both feel like Beal is overrated as an asset. But, this puts an incredible burden on Durant. He's going to have to be basically, I think the lead wing defender on this team, maybe even like a chip and rim protector guy. One of these guys, either Durant or Booker, is going to have to be the facilitator. And we've seen this over and over again when you put these 3 high usage rate guys together. The usage rate can only add up to 100%, right? It's just, by rule, you can only get to 100. So if you have 3 guys who are like, I'm usually 38, well, I'm usually 35, well, I'm usually 36, somebody's going to suffer. We even saw Curry, who's one of the best teammates of the last 30 years, when that first Warriors season got a little rocky there around Christmas. So it was like, man, I'm barely being used. And then they kind of navigated it and figured it out. I just think somebody's going to be unhappy out of these 3 guys. And it's probably going to be Beal, which I'm going to throw it back to you, goes back to How good is Bradley Beal? Are we sure he's that good? If he's your third guy, okay. But is he your third guy with two other score first offensive players, kind of creator, need the ball all the time guy? Now what am I getting with him? He's going to stand in the corner? Who's going to set him up? Is he going to be happy? He scored 30 points a game, 3 years ago? He had the ball all the time. He's not going to have the ball all the time now. I'm telling you that. So I don't see how he's happy with this. Plus, he's making $50 million a year.
Well, I'm glad you pointed out, in a vacuum, when you look at the pieces going out. Chris Paul, who's guaranteed $15 million if you waive him by June 28th, and it sounds like he's going to be rerouted somewhere anyway. Then you've got $10 million on the books for Shamet next year, and the second rounders, which we still aren't quite sure how it's all going to shake out, and the pick swap. If you look at that for Brad, even if you don't like Bradley Beal, you're like, okay, well, give me a break. I'll do that because this league is about
it's a fantasy
town.
trade.
Right.
Yeah.
But for Phoenix to then lock yourselves in this way, and then let's get to it. I'm shocked the pushback I got this week from pointing out that Beal doesn't play nearly as much as you think he does. And then it was okay, well, there was the COVID stuff and there were shorter seasons and, they were tanking and all these different things. You're okay, fine, let's do it this way. For his career, he's missed 19% of his games. He hasn't turned 30 yet. Again, he turns 30 at the end of this month. The last 4 seasons, he's missed 33% of the games. His first 5 seasons, he was about 39 to 40% from 3. The last 5 seasons, 36.5, 30, 35, 35, 35. So he's basically 35. But if you look at him on his 34% range from 3 in the last 3 seasons, of all the players in the league with 800 or more attempts, which he is, over 3 seasons, his 34% ranks 100 out of 109. I went through synergy numbers this morning, and I looked at his catch and shoot stuff because now we're going to be looking at somebody who, just because of Booker's amazing, I am as high on Booker as I've ever been. I still think Durant figures it out some way, even though, I didn't love a lot of the stuff I saw. We know his injury concerns going forward. But when I look at Beal on the catch and shoot stuff, for the most part, when you look at the points per shot efficiency, he's an average player. The free throws have gone down. The rebounding has always gone down. And I always feel like those years where he had 30 plus a game, back-to-back years, he was top 5 in usage in the NBA those 2 seasons. And he's not going to get to do that. So, of course, he can score. Of course, there's another level to his shot creation that you just don't get in a lot of players in the league. But if he's going to be a ball-stopping guy while Booker and Durant are watching him, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, other than that there's a brand new owner going look what I did. And you're okay, I'm just not a fan of it, because now this is who you are for 3 or 4 years too.
Yeah, there's a Bradley Beal, I think, in people's heads versus the Bradley Beal that's actually existed the last couple of years. When he averaged at 30 a game, he just had the ball all the time. I had a house who, has been my friend for 35 years, who's come on this pod and talked about Beal a bunch. It's just this is not an end of the game guy. If he's your number one guy, you're going nowhere. If he's in the Ray Allen 2008 role, Ray Allen was just a way better shooter, and Ray Allen was somebody who didn't need the ball a lot, could still have a huge impact on the game. We haven't really seen that version of Beal at all. And he's also not he's not an above average defensive player. I would say where would you put him? Would you put him average or below average?
I'd say below average. His box score plus minus, which again doesn't tell everything, especially in a team that hasn't been all that competitive, but he's been a negative defensive box score plus minus 9 of his 11 seasons. But the funny thing about anybody,
well, and then get to the passing, and can he create shots for other guys? That's not really there either. So it's somebody that he's basically a score first guy that I wouldn't put him above average in really any other category.
Yeah, I mean, in this year alone, I don't know how it shook out the other years because it was something I was always looking at with Harden and Embiid. But in turnovers per however many possessions during clutch time, Beal led the league. He was the most turnover prone guy in clutch moments in those games. So, this isn't to say that nobody's saying he sucks. It's that if I'm an owner, and you don't get to pay A money to just A guys. You don't. It's not the way the league works. We look at these contracts, we're I can't believe this guy get this guy. And you're yeah, but it's the fear of not having anything is why you're paying a premium on the players that aren't necessarily a premium guy. But for Beal to turn 30, to not be a dude that laces him up all the time, I don't know if it was just him in Washington and he was the good guy and everything sucked around him, But, when you're the number one guy, like, I'd like you to flirt with the playoffs a little bit more, like a little bit more play.
I think that team was a little bit better talent-wise than the record. Porzingis had a really good year for what you would expect from a Porzingis year last year. Kuzma was like a borderline all-star for most of that year. And if you look at their bench guys, like I like Danny Avdija. I thought he actually as a role guy was pretty good. Kispert, I think shot like 43% from three. He's not a bust. Their point guards weren't great, but for the most part, they were in the mix. They were 500, in January and February and looked like they were going to at least be a playing team. And they never got there. He hasn't really.
Well, he missed a lot of games.
He missed a lot of games, but he hasn't really, in 2017 when they almost beat the Celtics in the Kelly Olynyk game 7.
And they should have. They were a much better team than that Celtics team.
And one of the reasons they lost was the Celtics just basically, they figured out John Wall wasn't shooting threes well. And they basically put the series in his hand and was daring him to shoot threes. Beal, I thought, played pretty well. He didn't shoot that great from three in the playoffs, but I thought for the most part, he was laying the groundwork for this guy, there's something here. I just don't know as a third guy. We just learned this with Denver. Denver had their three best guys complementing each other so well. And Gordon was the third guy. Gordon's not as good as Bradley Beal on paper from a talent standpoint, right? If you're in a fantasy basketball draft, you're taking Bradley Beal for Aaron Gordon. But Aaron Gordon is a much more impactful basketball player on both ends than Bradley Beal is. And that was one of the reasons I thought that Jokic is the key reason. But I look at all the moves that Phoenix made, and there's Chris Paul stuff to get to, and there's Washington stuff to get to that we can do after the break. But I look at all the stuff Phoenix had, and I almost like this trade more if they hadn't done the KD trade. Like if they still had Mikal Bridges, and they still had Cam Johnson, and they still had all their firsts, and then they're like, hey, man, we just stole Bradley Beal. We barely gave up anything for him. And Booker and Beal are going to be our two high-priced guys. We have Mikal Bridges on this awesome contract. We still have all our picks. We have Ayton. There's one more move to be had, but we couldn't resist just grabbing Beal here. I like the team more if it was that. With this, where it's like, hey, we have these three super expensive guys. The second Abram's going to murder them. They're going to really have to rely on the goodwill of guys just being like, all right, I'll play for 1.6 just to try to win a title. If I'm doing that, I'd rather play with Denver. I'd rather be on Jokic's team. So we talked about new owner syndrome a lot. This is the most new owner syndrome-y guy we've had in a long time. And one of his lead advisors is Isaiah Thomas. And Isaiah Thomas likes to zag. He did this with the Knicks in mid-2000s when everyone else was trying to get smaller and small ball and shooting. And, the league was starting to shift a different way. And he was like, I'm going to get bigger. He said this. I'm going to get Zach Randolph. I'm going to get Eddie Curry. We're going to bully teams. We're going to play bigger. We're going to pound them. And he wanted a zag. And this to me feels like a zag where they're in the Suns, brain trust thing. And they're like, how do we get better? How do we get better? It's like, we just got to outscore everybody. We'll get Bradley Beal. How are they going to stop us with these three guys? I actually think it'll be a little easier to stop them than maybe they realize.
Well, they didn't have depth this past year, right? Depth was an issue before this happened. Like they always needed another point guard, I thought, to just make it easier on Chris Paul so he could be healthier later in the year. That's something I thought they should have had for years. They didn't even have another big in that Milwaukee matchup, which may have cost them a title in 21 because they just didn't have another. So this depth thing has been an issue when it wasn't like this. And now you're going to have these four guys making this kind of money. They have rights on two other players.
Do we think Ayton's on this team in 2 weeks? Because I would say no. I would say this would be step A and step B is some sort of Ayton for multiple players trade. But like what you just said, if we watch that Denver Phoenix series that happened a month ago and you put Bradley Beal in the Shamet spot, is that series different? Because I don't think it is. I don't know how Beal changes the destiny of them because they couldn't get stops. They had no depth. Like Denver was just basically, I don't even think that series should have gone 6. You had this historic fluke event of an 86-point game from two guys. I don't know how Beal changes the destiny of that series.
I just think it's so risky, man. I think it's so risky, and Beal is not somebody I'd want to pay this much money to. He's just not. Now, maybe he's energized. Like the Wizards stuff is weird because, you can blame Wall. You can blame the front office. You can blame a bunch of different things. I mean, the coaching thing, whatever, they tried a bunch of different deals. But like if you're truly that guy, which none of us ever have thought, like we never talked about Beal as a top 10 guy. I don't even know if he's top 20. And you're like, okay, can you at least flirt with, always being in the back end of contention for the playoff spot in the East? And so I wonder how many people would feel like, well, maybe the reason the team wasn't all that competitive is because their number one guy was Beal. So, look, he's going to score. He's going to have some huge nights. I can already see the headlines, like 3 games into the season, he goes for like 35, and it's like,
it's going so well. Wow.
Like, yeah, well, talk to me in 4 years when he's $57 million. So I think with the new CBA apron stuff, like this felt like a deal. Like, I don't know that I would have liked it in the previous CBA, but you throw it into the new one.
Yeah.
You throw it into the new one and you're like, did you guys not get the email? Like, did you not get it? And I love that you brought up the Isaiah part of it, because Isaiah's biggest thing with the Knicks is he couldn't stop himself from trading for bad contracts. Like, he never cared. I'll never forget listening to him on Mike and the Mad Dog, where Dog was like, I'm not going to do the impersonation, but he's like, you keep trading for these contracts.
I mean, Isaiah,
like,
you keep getting these expensive guys. I just don't know what you're going to do with them.
Steve Francis, $17 million, Isaiah. And Isaiah was like, yeah, but what you don't realize is that those contracts expire and they're valuable. And like, it was the weirdest defense of it. It's like, no, I'm just going to keep taking everybody's bad contracts because one day they expire. And you were like, what? Right. Like, anybody with any like entry-level understanding of how salaries work in the league was like, wait, that's your position? And so far, like, look, Durant gets hurt all the time. Durant's really expensive, but he's still Durant.
Right.
Maybe not peak Durant, but he's still Kevin Durant. That one I understood, even though that price retroactively looks exorbitant. I wouldn't want this tax bill. I wouldn't want this tax bill. Like, I would need more assurances that I feel like I'm easily without question, top 3 in the West to do something like this. And I don't know that. And again, yeah, you're right. There's still moves to come.
Last week, we did I wouldn't be surprised if you were another team in August draft, and we both had Beal number 1. We went through the salary, which was 46.7 this upcoming season, 50.2 in 24-25, 53.7 the next year, and then player option 57.1, 26-27. You want to do your joke?
I think we'll probably pick that year up.
Okay.
We're going to break that now.
It's just a staggering amount of money. The one thing I would love to find out, now that he waived his no trade clause, is that waived forever?
No, he still has it. Or does
he still have it? Okay. And then I'm glad you brought up the Durant thing, because he got hurt twice last year. And he's had some major injuries. He's had a Jones fracture in his foot. He tore his Achilles. He's had his knee operated on in different ways multiple times. He's 7 feet tall. He's been playing basketball since 2007. We've been talking about Jeff Green, your guy. Congrats, by the way. Got his title. And it's been a lot of Jeff Green, the old veteran. Oh, my God. Jeff Green's been on so many teams. Wow, the old guy finally did it. He was in the same draft as Kevin Durant. He's 2 years older, but same draft. So, I just think because Durant, other than like his hair is going a little bit, but he looks the same. He always looks the same. It's like when Hulk Hogan in the early 2000s still looked like Hulk Hogan, but it wasn't Hulk Hogan anymore. At some point, the Durant thing, he's going to not be one of the top 7 guys in the league anymore. And a lot of this is going to go on Booker. To me, is if Beal can come back and his threes can go way up again, maybe we'll feel differently about this trade. All right, we got to take a break. We got to hammer Washington. I really want to bring the, not even a small hammer out. I want to bring an ice pick hammer out and really go at them.
Okay, but I have one, when we come back, I have one question for you, because I could go on the Beal thing. Like, there's just so many parts of this that are so interesting. I still think there's more meat on the Phoenix bone, but I have a specific Beal 2008 Celtics, because I know we rarely bring up the 08 Celtics on the pod, so I just want to make sure we do that.
Interesting. All right, give me your 08 Celtics Beal analogy before we move on to the pathetic Washington team.
Were you surprised at the Celtics version of Ray Allen that first year?
Yes, because he had battled injuries and was in a pretty bad Seattle situation that year before. And I remember when they made the trade, I've talked about this, I was upset because I didn't get it. I was like, even if he's healthy again, where does Ray Allen and Paul Pierce take us? And then they had the KG trade coming. But I thought he really reinvented himself. Some guys do this. Like, even somebody as great as Kobe, there was still a reinvention with him. He added this whole 2008 to 2013 stretch of his superstar career that really made the career special. Like the way he was able to tweak his game, add stuff, add the little fall away, and just kind of change how he played for the better in a lot of ways. Elevated his career. I felt like Ray Allen was a junior version of that. He learned how to not have the ball at the time and still have huge impacts in games. And he ended up, he goes all the way through, basically through Miami in 2014, but, had 7 pretty meaningful years there on really good teams. I don't know if Beal has that in him. I'm not ruling it out, by the way. Are you? Like he might have it in him. I wouldn't cross it off.
Look, there's part of me as I've looked at this going, what if he's motivated by this and, knowing he was never a number 1 and then going like, I don't even think he's a 2 on a title contender. Well, here you go.
It's like a 2B.
What better spot to be a 3 with this group? And you're going to get to be the number 1 option in those games where Durant's gone. You're right, because there's still some TBD on the rest of this stuff with Ayton, where it may be the rare trade that usually I don't like, where you're trading the most talented player for 3 pieces, but they're kind of in need of that. And I don't want Booker to play point guard the whole time. I don't want Booker's drives to be taken away from him. I want him driving the way I saw him drive this year, that to me like puts him at a whole nother level. Like I'm so in on him and his mentality and everything. Like he's one of the few guys that loses in the second round for a team that seems like it's going in the wrong direction, where I'm more in on him now than ever before. So I don't want anything to interfere with that. But the reason I asked the Ray Allen question was that I think it was almost always kind of surprising for us, because you thought, hey, he's such a great shooter, but he wasn't really a catch and shoot guy, because he was always used to kind of working off the ball a little bit more.
Right.
And I mean it like in the way we kind of define catch and shoot now, where it's like you never move and you sit there and
like
just
wait.
Like
Seth Curry. Yeah.
Right. Even though Seth can do a little bit more.
Seth can do the other stuff too.
Right. But I thought it was way harder for Ray Allen than the other 2 guys. And it felt like a strain. And then he's taking like 8 less shots per game. And yet he's still at like 17 a game. He's still like almost 40% from 3. So the numbers tell you, oh, he just took less shots. But I thought it was like a real like, I don't know. I just think he deserved a lot of credit for, it couldn't have been a lot of fun all the time, but there was a greater good there, right? It was the goal of the team. And the other part of that team was that the 3 guys, we've already brought this up too many times, is they were all collectively over the individual part of it. They were old enough in their career. They'd been through their old failures. So yeah, I guess there's part of me that wonders, like, can Beal go in going, all right, dude, I've done a decade. I've got the money. I've got everything. I don't have any of the accolades. I've never done anything with a team. Like, I need to find a way. He is talented enough. I don't think any of us deny that. He is talented enough, I would think, to find a way to fit in where it's not at the detriment of the other guys. But if he's going to do ball stopping ISO shit and not make threes and then, be less available post 30, unless that's all Wizards related, it's just, I try to kind of see the other side of something, even if I don't necessarily believe it. But there's going to have to be some real sacrifice from him of adapting his game around it. And I wonder, I don't know him. I mean, I don't know if that's in his makeup or not.
Ray Allen in 2007 on Seattle, his usage rate was 29.5. And he went to Boston, it was 21.6, 20.8, 20.2 the next 3 years. Even if you look at field goal attempts, he was 21 a game in Seattle in 07. He was 13.5 a game in Boston in 08. That's a huge sacrifice. And you mentioned, the Beal, like, is he ready to sacrifice at this point of his career? I mean, we just saw him take a crazy contract from Washington, a team that he was going nowhere because it was a money decision. That was it. So that always makes me dubious. I think there's real red flags with him. Just go look at everyone on Basketball Reference. I always make this point. Basketball Reference, 78, 79-year history of basketball at this point. And go look at the stats. Go look at when people peak. Like Beal had those 2 straight years in the 30s. When it drops to 23 and 23 the next 2 years, the history of basketball says that's usually a bad sign. You kind of end up where you are. Like Jermaine O'Neal was the best example of this. He was like a 20 and 10 guy, and then all of a sudden he was like a 13 and 8 guy. And it's like, oh, and then teams started trading for him. Well, we'll get him back. And then it's like, no, this is kind of where he is now. We'll hear stuff, because we hear this every year, about the Suns are going to stagger these guys. And, they'll always be able to have 2 of them on the court, and it's going to be great. And here's all the ways it's going to work. But I'm sorry, basketball comes down to the last 8 minutes. We just watched that Nuggets-Lakers series. I thought the Lakers were the second best team in the league. every one of those games came down to the last 8 minutes and my 5 against your 5 and who are we playing. And so we can do this whole stagger thing and maybe that'll help them in the regular season. But ultimately, it's going to come down to your best 5 guys. Can Beal or Booker guard the other team's best, creator / who's guarding Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in round 1? Is it Booker? Is it Beal?
It's Booker now. Yeah.
Is it free agent $1.6 million guy? Who's guarding Jason Tatum in the finals? Is it Durant? So I just think this team has real holes still. I think we both agree. Yeah, cool. If you can get Bradley Beal for what you got on paper, it makes a ton of sense. But the contract is terrifying. It's terrifying because you have no outs now. And we've talked about this before with Gobert, the Gobert trade and other ones. I don't like trades where I have no outs. Like, this is it. I am fucking in now. My out now is like basically a Devin Booker trade, which I'm never doing. And if Durant doesn't work on the Suns team, he's not going to have nearly the value what you gave up. And then the Beal thing, maybe this was his value. Like, I thought it was interesting. Miami didn't want him. Miami could have beaten this trade, right? They could have traded a hero and 2 picks for him. Probably could have gotten Lowry and 2 picks for him. They didn't want him.
I wonder if the hero part of it was that the Wizards go like, look, we don't want the rest of the hero money, which is still significant. I mean, he got the 4-year, $120 million contract. It was all guaranteed.
Well, would you rather add Lowry and 2 firsts than what they got back? I would have.
Well, 2 firsts, yeah. I mean, the funniest thing about doing this deal with Phoenix is you couldn't even get like this deal if Phoenix hasn't spent all their firsts on Durant. It has 2 firsts in it. Like, it probably just has 2 firsts in it. And
yeah, because they're like, come on, just give us 2. We'll put some protections on them.